Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
When Michael Carey and Alison Cowser founded the East Coast Bakehouse, they had global ambitions for their biscuit manufacturing brand. As we enter 2020, and in spite of their roller coaster journey, the business is now exporting to 26 countries and is planning to ramp up their export activities. Michael joins me now to tell us about this roller coaster journey and achieving large-scale success as a €23 million food startup business. Michael, you co-founded the East Coast Bakehouse with the star of Dragon's Den, Alison Cowser. But first, perhaps you can remind us about the story behind East Coast Bakehouse.
Good morning, Karl. Yes, we started on our journey about 5 years ago. We put a business plan together. We raised the funding. We bought a site in Drogheda, a derelict building, and we converted it into a highest quality food standard manufacturing facility and installed what has become the largest individual biscuit production line in Europe. We started trading in the middle of 2016, and we've been up and running since then. And thankfully, the business has seen some good success and some good progress.
The biscuit market is a very competitive space, of course dominated by some very big players. So what attracted you to that particular sector?
Yeah, it's a massive sector and a very stable sector. People continue to enjoy biscuits. The shape of the market has changed. There's some really good growth in some of the higher functional type products like high protein biscuits or low sugar biscuits. And there's also very high growth in more indulgent products. So both ends of the spectrum are growing. So the overall market is very large. There's about €5 million worth of biscuits consumed in Ireland every week. And almost all of those biscuits are, other than the ones we produce, are imported.
So when you set out on the journey, how did you set about creating a product and a brand that would stand out in the market for consumers?
We have a management team, myself and Alison, who, as you say, was one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, Alison Cowser. It was also my wife. And I was very pleased when it was announced that she was a dragon on Dragon's Den. I could tweet my favourite tweet I've ever done to say, now at last everyone knows I've been married to a dragon for 20 years. Which she now laughs at. At the time it was a bit touchy, but no, we've been in business together for the best part of 20 years. We put a really strong management team together at East Coast Bakehouse. Most of us used to work in Jacobs. We reformed into a management team and we set out on a journey which has been a bit of a roller coaster, if I'm entirely honest. It has had some ups and downs over the last 4 or 5 years. But thankfully, we've made good progress and we've broken through now to exceeding the break-even volumes that are necessary to fill a very large production line and thankfully a very efficient manufacturing facility in Drogheda.
And before we discuss that roller coaster journey that you've been on over the past 5 years, I'm wondering, how did Alison's stint as an investor on RTE's Dragon's Den benefit the business?
It's benefited hugely, as well as finding other opportunities to invest in food in our own project. It has helped to raise the profile of the brand. It has given loads of opportunities to talk about what we're trying to do and tell our story in a way that we wouldn't have had such an opportunity if Alison wasn't in that role. And she did that role for 2 years. She invested in about, I think, 4 or 5 companies in that process. But the spin-off for East Coast Bakehouse has been an issue of raising awareness for us. And we make the most of that at every opportunity we can.
Now, many will say that Ireland is too expensive a country to enter into the manufacturing world. So from that perspective, talk to us about how capital intensive setting this business up was for you.
I think Ireland is incredibly well placed to be a manufacturer of food. We've got an incredible heritage with ingredients and sort of primary food ingredients, but not such a great track record with packaged goods, consumer packaged goods, where we import most of our grocery products. But the opportunity here is enormous. We've got a well-invested plant. We've invested €23 million in total in establishing this business. And we believe we can not just substitute some of that €5 million worth of biscuits that are imported every week into Ireland, but we can use it as a base for exporting. And around 75-80% of our output is currently exported. And we can do that because we've invested well. We have a very good facility, and we're currently selling our brand in 26 countries around the world. We just won, last November, we won the Irish Exporter of the Year award from the Exporters Association, which we were delighted with. It was an extraordinary achievement for the team.
And how did you set about raising the 23 million euros that was required to establish this business?
It's made up of a mix of funding. We put some of our own funds in and myself and Alison are the majority shareholders in the business. We brought in a group of other investors. We went out and spoke. Personally, we spoke to probably about 50 potential investors, and 12 of them have come on board as individual investors. Mainly, quite a number of them are from the food industry. So we've got people like Stephen Tredell, who was a former colleague of mine. I used to work in Kellogg's, and he was the European president of Kellogg's. He now sits on our board as a non-exec director and is an investor in the business. Mary Ann O'Brien, who established Billy O'Brien's Chocolates. Richard Cullen, who established the Jelly Bean Factory. So people who've been around this track before have come on board, and many others. There's, as I say, about 12 in total. Who have come on board and supported us financially. We also have bank debt, which we raised through Ulster Bank, who have supported the project right from the outset and have been hugely supportive. And we've had great, absolutely incredible support from Enterprise Ireland, who have provided funding, but not just funding. They've provided guidance and support and encouragement to establish a new manufacturing business of this type from scratch.
Now, the East Coast Bakehouse is in its 5th year of business. So how did you manage the cash burn, which would have occurred within the business in the early years?
Yeah, we included in that 23 million of monies that have been ploughed into the business. Approximately about 10 million of that has been the overheads during the period while the volumes were growing. So effectively they were covering the losses of the business in the early stages. This is a very unusual startup in the food sector. It's a large-scale startup. To make that work, you have to build up the sales. And we're growing rapidly. We're growing about 2 or 3 times the previous year each year. And that growth will continue. The facility has the capability of producing approximately 30 million euros worth of biscuits with the current capital that's been spent. And we can further extend it and add more capacity to it as the opportunities arise.
And how receptive have the multiples been to placing East Coast Bakehouse biscuits on their shelves?
In Ireland, we're listed with all of the multiples. We also produce retail private label for a number of them. So we do our own brand, but we also do retail private label. And I think most Irish retailers, or most of the retailers in Ireland, recognise the need to have local supply. Brexit has been a bit of a shock to everybody, clearly. And the risks around Brexit, where the retailers have been sourcing product almost exclusively from the UK, taking their biscuit products in from the UK. They now have an opportunity to source those products here in Ireland, and they've been very supportive. Every one of the retailers have supported us in a different way. But the real opportunity for us is on the export market, and we're in distribution in a couple of major retailers in the UK. We're in the USA. We're in the Middle East. We've had some business in Africa. So we're in 26 countries in total, and that will continue to grow. And as I say, the big opportunity is export oriented and meeting the needs of a market which is very dynamic.
And specifically in relation to the export market, Michael, what is your route to entry into those particular markets?
We deal directly with some of the major retailers. So as an example, there's a UK retailer called Morrison's, and we have a direct relationship with that company, and we supply East Coast Bakehouse branded products into all of their stores in the UK. With the more harder to reach countries. We go through agents. We have an arrangement with a company called Tudor Rose International, who have had a history of trading with biscuit-type products internationally. And we've been selling to them, and they sell on to a number of so areas like the Middle East and Africa has been done through Tudor Rose.
Now, it was recently announced that the East Coast Bakehouse is seeking to raise a further €5 million in equity and debt. What will this funding be used for?
Yeah, we're just kicking off a process. We have started the process in the last week or so. We've appointed EY, Corporate Finance, as our advisors. And we are seeking to raise funds for two purposes mainly. One is for more equipment, which will give us some flexibility on, particularly in the types of packaging formats that we can offer our customers. And the second use is to fund working capital growth.
And does Brexit cause you any concern for your continued success within the UK market?
Absolutely. Brexit, the vote happened on the same month that we started trading in June 2016. And our original plan was to export about 80% of our volume into the UK. So we've had to change our direction entirely and change our approach. And even now, we're clearly very concerned that the outcome at the end of 2020 is one that allows us to continue to trade in the UK without any disruption. That's really crucial for us and for every other food company in Ireland. The Irish food industry depends hugely on the UK market, and always will. In total, in the Irish food industry, 34% of all our exports go to the UK. It's the number one market for Irish exports, and it will always be the number one market for exports of our food products. The consumers are very similar, the tastes are very similar, the formats of packaging are the same. It's easy to do business in the UK. We want it to continue to be easy to do business. So hopefully the process will continue on its current track, and there will be a very close relationship between our two markets. Now,
you referred to the roller coaster ride that you've been on for the past 5 years. What has been the greatest challenge that you've had over that period?
I think probably the biggest challenge has been the time it has taken to make the progress we had planned to make in every aspect. So time really has been the issue. Sometimes issues that are outside our control. So from a production facility perspective, establishing and commissioning the new machinery, we had purchased various parts of this production line, which is all connected now, but sourced them from 4 different major European manufacturers of machinery. And the commissioning of that plant took longer than we had originally expected. The build-up of our business, particularly in the UK, took much longer than we anticipated, mainly because of that Brexit issue, where UK retailers were a bit jumpy about switching supply away from a local UK producer to a producer sitting in the EU.
And are there any particular decisions that you regret making over the past 5 years in business?
I think given the changes and the impact of the Brexit decision, had we known that was going to happen, we would have probably come up with a different plan originally. I think we'd probably moved a bit faster with some aspects of. We've built a really good, strong management team now. We've brought in some new people, we've recruited a new managing director recently, Sean Murphy, who has joined us from Mondelez, an international food group, and a number of other additional appointments into our management team. I think we might have made some of those investments a bit earlier, brought in more people earlier, and preempted the growth that we were going to get.
And in terms of your outlook for the business market here in Ireland and let's say the UK over the next 5 years, do you think that there's going to be an even faster move to healthier snacks?
There's a movement, I think, in both directions towards healthier products. So we're very active with development and offering of sugar-free biscuits or reduced sugar biscuits. We've got a contract to manufacture high-protein biscuits, which is a very interesting sector. So those sort of healthier offerings are showing really good growth. And at the other end of the scale, the really high chocolate content, highly indulgent biscuit-type products are also growing very rapidly. And I think people are realizing if they're going to eat a product like a biscuit, they want to eat a good one. And it's the types of products that are sitting in the middle that are likely to suffer.
And as we look at the overall food sector here in Ireland, you alluded to it at the very beginning of the interview, that we're seeing very, very few businesses of scale enter the food industry. Why do you think that is, and what needs to happen to encourage more people to have bigger dreams and plans when starting a food business?
I think there is a massive opportunity for many large-scale food companies to start up in Ireland. I think there's lots of people can say there's lots of barriers. There's lots of reasons why they don't start a large-scale food company. It might be they don't have the idea, or they don't have the cash, or the access to the funds, or they don't have the right set of skills around them. In reality, all of those things can be overcome. If you sit in a room long enough, you'll come up with an idea. If you meet with 4 or 5 people around the table, almost anybody could come up with 10 or 20 really, really strong ideas to set up scale food businesses in Ireland. And I think funding, it's a struggle, and the banks don't necessarily always do what they say in their ads, but it is possible, and I think we've shown it's possible to raise funding in this project, and others have too. So you can get over the funding, you can find some ways to get started from a funding point of view, and you can create teams of people to compensate for lack of skill. So I think all of those issues can be overcome. I think the only thing that stops people setting up businesses of scale in the food sector is the will, the drive, the belief that they can do it. And I think hopefully a story like East Coast Bakehouse can illustrate that it is possible. And hopefully it will encourage others to have a go. And if anybody is listening to your program and has a dream to start something of this type, and they'd like to come to see what we've done in East Coast Bakehouse, we'd be more than happy to welcome them to Drogheda.
Well, that's a very kind offer, Michael. And my final question this morning is to yourself and Alison. Are you growing this business to keep it or to sell it?
We have no short-term plans to sell it, but equally we're not trying to build a family legacy here that we're going to pass on to our grandchildren. So it's likely at some point in the future, it could be 20 years away, that this business will form part of a larger group. It may well be that we continue to acquire businesses and create that group. So we've no fixed view on it, but it's likely to be part of something bigger in 10 or 20 years' time.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Michael Carey from East Coast Bakehouse, and we wish Michael and his team every success with their latest funding round. We're almost at closing time here now at Business Matters, but before we go, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my production team, my guests for their contribution, and especially you as always for listening. Join me again next Saturday morning when we'll have more from the world of business. But until then, have a profitable week.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.